Okay, Russell, is it good or bad for Taiwan that there is this fluidity in U.S.-Chinese relations? We don't know exactly where it's headed, but clearly there is fluidity, there's change.
Yeah, but before I answer that question, I just want to quibble a little bit with Richard's characterization of the Tsai administration as sort of pushing towards greater separateness. I don't think that it's moving towards greater separateness. And as a matter of fact, I think the policies undertaken by her administration has been recognized pretty widely, both I think outside in academic circles as well as from policy statements made by U.S. government officials, that they've been pragmatic, they've been measured. And this is because this cross-strait policy has been based on three pillars, right? The ROC Constitution, the Act governing relations between the people of the mainland area and the Taiwan area, the historical fact of the 1992 meetings and subsequent negotiations, all of which, of course, Beijing just brushed aside as a, quote, incomplete test paper, end quote. But I think, this is clear to the United States that the Tsai administration is undertaking quite a measured approach in their policy towards Beijing. In terms of the specific question as whether or not this is in Taiwan's interest or not, I'm kind of more of a glasses half full kind of guy, and I'm more optimistic than I am pessimistic about the what I see as happening in the past 2 years. First, of course, starting with the convention-breaking phone call that the president-elect took with President Tsai. I think we should all remind ourselves that there's nothing within the U.S. One China policy, the three communiques, that says that the president-elect cannot take a phone call from the president of Taiwan. Sure, it was a sort of norm in diplomatic behavior that people accepted as accepted. And over time, it sort of created a rule in itself, and people deterred themselves from undertaking anything that would be seen by Beijing as breaking the One China principle, their One China principle, not the U.S. One China policy. And I think it's important to sort of point that out, as we're looking at these types of gestures, both symbolic and not, about Taiwan. I would also add that, congressional support for Taiwan remains very strong and robust. And I think the passage of the Taiwan Travel Act, which encourages high-level visits on all levels between the United States and Taiwan, is a meaningful gesture. I think we can argue whether or not this, I would say that this had already been within the authority of the executive branch to undertake such activities, but nonetheless, I think this builds a foundation, a legislative foundation, for successive administrations to undertake that. We're sort of building towards a longer term a relationship based more on objective reality.
So what would the American administration have to do that would cross a red line in Beijing? What would they do that Xi Jinping would say, now it's time to start firing missiles over Taiwan?
You're asking me, okay. I mean, I think, it's really important not to sort of, condition all our responses to simply what we think Beijing will do. I think Beijing knows very well that it can ratchet up and ratchet down its displeasure on any type of activities that sees as crossing its red lines, in order to sort of modulate, in order to modify or shape behaviors, especially from the United States, given concerns about, of course, the threat of war. That being said, I think that there are red lines. There are red lines that China had promulgated through its anti-secession law. There are also, sort of clear but also ambiguous. It's kind of paradoxical in that way about what types of actions taken could prompt this type of activity. A formal declaration of independence clearly is one of them. Foreign interference, I think, in Taiwan would be seen as a very vague, sort of means in unrest in social, political unrest in Taiwan could justify also intervention. Foreign military presence, foreign military, for instance, last year when there were discussions public discussions, media reports about the possibility of conducting port calls with Taiwan. That the minister counselor in
very angry,
very angry about that and said that this would basically prompt war. And again, I think it's very important that the United States does not condition its one China policy based on deference to what should be the PRC's one China principle.